I started this tiny group, and we've grown really, really big. And I appreciate everybody being in the group and here with us tonight. I don't want to take any time from our special guests, but I do just want to introduce them and then I'll turn it over. Shout out to group member Lisa Maslow, who brought this opportunity to the group and made this possible. And our speakers tonight are going to be Dr. Glanzman and Dr. Nissley-Tsiopinis. Hopefully I'm doing that name justice. Dr. Glanzman is a developmental and behavioral pediatrician, and Dr. Nissley-Tsiopinis is a psychologist, both at the Center for the Management of ADHD at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And they're going to be sharing with us some of the recent research that they've done so that we as parents can help our kiddos with ADHD and executive function challenges to be successful. And we are all, I can speak for the whole group, we're super appreciative of you doing this just for us. So I will turn it over to all of you. Thanks for being here.
Hello, and thank you for joining us tonight for a discussion about what parents can do to help their children with ADHD and executive function challenges. We have a lot to cover, so we're going to jump right in. We're aiming to talk for about 50 minutes and have about 30 minutes at the end for questions and discussion. First, we'd like to thank Jane Zola, Judy Nissenbaum, Lisa Maslow, and the Yetta Deitch Novotny Charitable Trust for allowing us to work on this project and to provide this presentation. Our goals are to cover what are executive functions and how are they related to ADHD, what types of treatment exist for executive function deficits, and what parents can do at home to support EFs. We hope that this will help you develop a plan to help your child, but also be more prepared to follow new developments in this area going forward. What are executive functions? They are a collection of related but different, uniquely human abilities that allow us to set and accomplish goals. Even though the concept of EF is over 100 years old, there's still significant controversy about it. Some of the controversies are what specific abilities constitute EFs, how we should measure them, and how we actually help children with weak EFs in their daily lives. Many children with ADHD have executive function deficits. It's an important underlying characteristic of ADHD, but it's not the only one. They may also have difficulty with their reaction time, processing time as it passes, using self-talk to guide their behavior, and sustaining their mental energy. In spite of the controversy over what is and isn't an executive function, most scientists agree that there are three core EFs. The first one is working memory. Working memory is the ability to hold information in mind while you're doing a task. And specifically, it's the ability to update that information as new information comes in while you're continuing to hold on to the previous information. Some examples that require this EF are following a multi-step task, or reading comprehension, or writing a passage with multiple sentences. Response inhibition is the ability to stop yourself from reacting to stimuli or thoughts that might derail your progress toward your goal, especially when you were already primed to respond. This is important in any situation requiring thinking before acting, such as not running into the street after your ball without looking both ways, or not rushing into an assignment without reading the directions, or not reacting angrily to someone over a circumstance they could not control. Cognitive flexibility means modifying your thinking and actions when new information suggests that what you're doing isn't working. This is important for all types of problem solving, compromising, transitioning, and managing unexpected situations. In addition to these three core EFs, some other cognitive skills that some authors consider to be EFs include regulating attention, self-monitoring, interference control, which is kind of the precursor to inhibition, preparedness to act or to initiate, being motivated, delaying gratification, and emotional regulation. Some authors divide EFs into cool and hot categories, with cool EFs being those that we need when doing emotionally neutral tasks, shown here in blue, and hot EFs being those that have an emotional component. Working memory is considered one of the cool EFs and behavioral inhibition one of the hot EFs. Cognitive flexibility doesn't really fit into this dichotomy. Whenever we talk about EFs, we must also take into account how they're measured. We currently have two ways to measure them: neuropsychological tests or behavior rating scales. Both have advantages and disadvantages, and neither is really ideal on its own. Neuropsychological tests are done individually with a child by a psychologist, but they're not usually part of the kind of psychoeducational evaluation done by the school district to see if your child qualifies for an IEP. These kinds of tests may measure working memory, inhibition, cognitive flexibility, planning, and the speed or accuracy of information processing, but they're not great measures of these characteristics as your child uses them in daily life. Rating scales are a little better at measuring EFs as they're used in daily life, but they involve a rater whose observations about other aspects of your child, for example, their misbehavior, or the rater's own frame of reference, for example, through a lens of high anxiety, may overly influence their responses. The brief, which stands for Behavior Rating Inventory of Executive Function, is the most commonly used EF rating scale, and it is increasingly being used in school-based psychoeducational evaluations. Some researchers are studying the use of virtual reality scenarios as a way to more accurately measure a child's daily life executive challenges from the laboratory or the clinic. Core EFs, along with the additional cognitive skills, must be used in an integrated and coordinated fashion in order to complete the bigger daily life challenges listed here that are typically difficult for children with ADHD. For example, let's think about your middle schooler who has to write an essay and is trying to decide on a topic and how to start. First, he must develop a list of options in his head and hold them there while weighing the pros and cons of each. That requires working memory. Because this is a hard process if you have weak working memory, he's likely to select a choice impulsively without having the opportunity to fully consider the pros and cons of each. That's how working memory and behavioral inhibition interact. He's likely to select his choice impulsively. In the process of writing, he's likely to encounter the disadvantages of his selection, but with weak cognitive flexibility, he may not be able to problem solve around those problems. He's at risk, also because of weak inhibition, of scrapping the idea he chose altogether, but because of weak working memory, when he goes back to try to make another choice, he's still going to be ineffective. After a few rounds of this, I suspect you know what happens. Either he whips off something just to be done with this misery, and someone later calls it careless or disorganized or less than what he's capable of, or he avoids restarting the assignment until the last minute, or maybe he doesn't do it at all. Furthermore, the next time he has to do this kind of assignment, it's already aversive to even think about starting it. Because you're there, asking him about it, trying to be helpful, you become associated with this misery, no matter how good your intentions. So trying to help your child struggling with weak EFs quickly becomes unpleasant and frustrating for both of you. Moral of the story, it is okay to help your child. In fact, we're going to tell you that you must, but it's best if you can start early when he or she is still seeking and wanting your help. Approaches for older adolescents are somewhat different and are more likely to need to include an outside professional. Most of the rest of this talk will focus on what we're calling daily life tasks rather than the core EFs, because this is what your child has to do in daily life and what you want to help him accomplish. These daily life skills matter because organization, time management, and planning skills impact academic performance. They can predict school grades even above and beyond how severe the child's ADHD is. And most importantly, they can be taught. Now to intervention. There are 3 categories of interventions that we're going to talk about tonight. Dr. Nissley-Tsiopinis is going to talk about the first 2, and I'll come back to talk about the third.
Good evening. I'm happy to be here with you and excited to be talking about this. So I want to start by talking about the first type of intervention. This is parent-mediated treatment. We know that children with ADHD have difficulty consistently doing what they know they should do. I'm sure I don't need to tell you as parents of this. How often have you told your child to do something like, make sure you give this to your teacher? You know your child knew what to do. In fact, you even had them restate it to you, and they came home with it. They forgot to do it the next day. This difficulty doing something in a different setting presents a challenge working with children with ADHD to teach them skills. In fact, for years, treatment research told us we couldn't work with children with ADHD directly because it wouldn't impact their daily life functioning. Therefore, for years, we focused on teaching parents like yourselves and teachers to use techniques to help children show the desired behaviors in the setting where they are. I've told parents often, we're training you to be the therapist. But we have evidence from research that this works. It helps if we teach you to set up structures at home to help your child do things that they find hard to do. We also know that this parent training approach works to improve children's organization, time management, and planning skills. However, setting up structure to help children use organization in daily life was not enough. Parents told us this, and they were right. In fact, the majority of children with ADHD have deficits in their organizational skills, not just in their use of these skills. So they need to be taught skills. For example, with parent supports, your child might be bringing home everything that's needed for homework, but they might be doing this because they're bringing home a backpack that weighs as much as them. So your child needs to learn skills in order to help them fix the skills deficit. 15 years ago, we didn't think we could teach your child skills and have it work. In the past 15 years, the field has come far. We now have multiple programs that we know work that teach children with ADHD organizational skills. In fact, at this point, organizational skills training has now joined parent training as a treatment that works for children with ADHD. So what do we know works? We know that specific organizational skills training programs work to improve both the organizational skills and the grades of children with ADHD. And if we look at common threads in these programs, it can help us know how we need to work with children in order to make a difference in their real life skills and academic performance, in order to make it jump across that barrier to their real life. Based on what these programs do, we know what strategies will help address specific organizational challenges. However, we do not know what specific organizational technique you should use. For example, one program uses an accordion binder, another uses 3-ring binders. Different techniques at this level have not been compared, so we do not know which one technique works better than others. So I want to begin by teaching you what we do know, how to work with your child in order to help them do better in daily life, especially at school. As I explain, I'm going to use an example challenge that is very common: difficulty completing and turning in homework assignments. At the end, I'm happy to respond to questions that you have about applying these principles to address other challenges. The first thing we know you need to focus on is teaching skills, not accommodating deficits. Many school accommodation plans focus on accommodations for deficits. I request these for children all the time. They lessen the impact of ADHD and organizational skills deficits on grades. However, they don't teach your child the skills needed for life. Accommodations may be needed for a time, but our goal is to teach skills so that the accommodations are no longer needed. For example, turning in all homework. Accommodations would be things like the teacher emailing all the homework papers to you, having an extra set of textbooks at home so that your child has the materials needed, getting an individual prompt from the teacher to turn in the work, or not having a grade penalty for turning in work late. Once you've identified the skill you want your child to work on, you then need to begin by creating a safe space for your child to identify and discuss challenges. This is a really important step because students often have a lot of fear and avoidance to becoming organized because this is the place that always gets them in trouble. So one of the really hard things to do as a parent, but one of the really important things is being positive and encouraging as you relate to your child about this. I know that what I'm asking is really hard. So, because for example, it's hard to praise your child for writing down their assignments when they didn't complete the assignment, so they still got the 0. However, if we don't help them feel good for learning that first step, they're going to give up before they learn anything. Next, it's really important to normalize the challenges. Your child might feel like they're the only ones who forget anything. They need to know that everyone forgets things sometimes. Give them an example of a time when you forgot something. Ask them to look for times when other people forget them. Next, it's important to externalize the challenge. Your child feels like a failure, feels like he or she has failed to do this, like something's wrong with them. It's really hard to change something if you're feeling like a failure. So frame it in a way that doesn't blame them for the problem. Howard Abacov and Richard Gallagher use the analogy that our brain is like a computer, and just like there are computer glitches, sometimes we have brain glitches. That lets you join with your child against the problem to fix it. Let's beat the glitches together. And last, we want to engage them in creating the plan. It is really important that your child feels like they're in charge of figuring out what works for them, not like it's one more thing that you're telling them to do and they have to do. We'd like to show you how this might work. So I'm going to ask my daughter, Marianne, to come up here. So let's assume that my daughter, Marianne, is having difficulty turning in her homework. I want to find a time when we're both not stressed, hard thing to find, and ask to talk to her. Marianne, I've noticed you've been missing some homework. I know you really want to do well. So I'm wondering if we can talk and see if there's things I can do to help you with that. Would that be okay?
I guess.
I know it's really hard to remember to do things. We all forget sometimes. Remember last week, I forgot to get your favorite cereal at the grocery store. Have you seen other people forget things?
Yeah, I was mad at you when you forgot my cereal.
I know.
And yesterday Dad forgot the car keys.
Yeah, Marianne, I know you feel bad when these things happen. I felt bad when I forgot your cereal. I don't want you to feel bad. I want us to work together to help you get credit for the work you do. Is that okay?
Okay.
Okay. So can I tell you, our brain is like an amazing computer. Do you know what a computer glitch is?
Yeah, like when it freezes.
Yeah, exactly. And just like our computer, our brain gets glitches. Your brain is amazing. You remember so much, but sometimes it forgets. What we need to do is remember a way, figure out a way to keep those glitches from messing up our life. Do you think we could be a team and help you, help all of us, your dad and I too, figure out a way to keep these glitches from messing things up?
We could try.
Okay, well, that's all I ask. I make lists to make sure I don't forget things. I didn't take my shopping list last week. That's why I forgot. But what works for me might not work for you. You're the expert on you. So I need you to help me come up with a plan that figure out what will work best for you. Can we come up with a plan together?
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to stop here and excuse my daughter. So first, I just want to say some children will not be as agreeable as Marianne. especially older teens or children who have had longer negative experiences. It can be a whole lot harder to engage them. We didn't have time to go through that kind of an engagement, but persisting to be positive as you try to engage them often will work. But we know it's really hard to break difficult and prior interaction patterns. So just remember, you're not alone. You can also find a therapist to work with you and your child to do this. So once you have your child ready to join with you and coming up with a plan, the next step is to break down the skill into smaller steps. In our example, Marianne was missing homework assignments. There are a lot of steps involved in completing homework assignments. First, she has to know what she has to do for homework. Then she has to write down what she has to do so she remembers it. She has to bring home the things she needs to do the homework. She has to actually look at the list she wrote when it's time to do the homework. She has to do the homework. Then she has to take the completed homework back to school in a place where she can find it when the teacher says to turn it in, and she has to remember to turn it in. If we start by just saying she should work on turning in assignments, we're asking her to do all those steps. So we want to start with the first step, like writing down her homework so she knows what she has to do. Then we want to teach completion of the individual steps one at a time. It's really important to be careful to teach your children only one skill at a time, because none of us can learn to do multiple things at the same time. This is even more true for children with ADHD, as I'm sure all of you can say from some times where you've asked them to go get 3 things and they've come back with 1. Not only should you focus on just one skill, if a skill has lots of components, it might be too difficult. So in this case, break the skill down into component skills and teach it one component at a time. As a rule of thumb, if the behavior is not happening, then the step is too big. Kids want to do well if they feel like they can. And so if they're not doing something, that first step is too big and you need to break it down further. Even though these organizational tasks seem very easy and logical to us, for children with ADHD, they also often feel as impossible as if we were asking them to jump up an entire flight of steps. No one can jump up the entire flight of steps. However, most of us could jump up one step onto the first step. And once we're on the first step, jumping onto the second step no longer feels as hard. And if we keep doing this, eventually we're at the top of the steps. The last point here is that learning only happens when children are successful. So it's really important to reinforce any effort to complete the skills. Often I'm telling kids, you thought about doing what I told you to do? That's wonderful. Now, how can we help that thinking become doing? We want to focus on their successes, not their failures. So once we've broken it down to step, we know what step we're working on. Now for each step, we want to develop a plan for that skill to be practiced. We're going to write down that plan because we want to help them remember the plan we came up with. A key piece, like I mentioned in the beginning, is make sure that your child's involved in writing down the plan and figuring out also where to put it. Lots of written reminders just hang there and don't ever get looked at. And so remembering where to put it is a key piece. And then your role becomes prompting them to look at the plan instead of telling them what to do. Because if they are learning to look at the plan, they're moving toward independence. So once we have a written plan, then we want to explicitly teach them the steps. Role play, practice, have them show you how you'll do this. Okay, I'm your English teacher and I just told you what you have to do for homework. What are you going to do? And have them show you multiple times until they've mastered the skill during the practice session. Do lots of different variations. For example, the English teacher might do it different than the math teacher or their science teacher. Keep practicing until you do not need to prompt or correct your child during the practice. These steps seem logical for us, but for them it's not logical or they'd be doing it. Practice helps it become more natural for them. Also, your child isn't doing these things because they probably find them a bit aversive, often because they see them as boring. And so practice is helping them to get used to doing something boring so that they find it easier to face. So doing a skill during practice is a great start. We want to make sure they master it, but it doesn't guarantee being able to use it in daily life. So With your child, add steps to that written plan that help them know when they need to use the skill and how they will remind themselves to use the skill. Part of that plan is what might get in the way and how to avoid it. What your goal is to build a habit. It takes 6 weeks to build a new habit, likely longer if you have ADHD. Start with the level of support they need to be successful and then gradually pull back. Even if they've seemed to master it, it's really important to fade back slowly so that they can continue to be successful. I'm going to ask my daughter, Marianne, to come up again so we can show you a bit more of what this might look like. Marianne, we decided we were going to work on turning in homework. Do you still agree that that's something you want to work on doing? Okay, great. First, let's think about what happens for homework so we can figure out where the glitches get you. How do you know what you have to do for homework?
My teacher writes it on the board. We're supposed to write it down when we get to class.
Okay, that is such important information. Thank you for telling me. What gets in the way of writing it down?
Well, when I get to class, my friends are talking and I'm talking with them, and pretty soon the teacher's telling us to take out our reading book and start reading, and I haven't written it down.
That's such great information. I can picture being in class. So it sounds like what you have to do is get your planner out right away, open it to the right page, and do all this while your friend's talking to you, and do it as quickly as you can. Is that right? How can we help you do this?
No, it takes a long time to take out my planner.
You got it.
And then I have to find a page to write it down. And then I'm already behind.
So can you think of a place you could put it that you could get it out quicker and a way to have it be the right page?
I could put it right in the front. If
That's a
it's
great
always
idea.
in the front, I could find it maybe faster.
Oh, that's great. And you have a clip there. Maybe that clip could help it you turn to the right page if you put it on today's page.
Yeah, it's not on today's page.
Okay. Well, why don't you put it on today's page? So let's write down the plan. So what's the plan going to be? Do you want me to write it or you write it?
You ready?
I'll be the secretary. Okay. So what's the plan going to be?
I'm going to put my assignment book in the front of my backpack and have the clip on the right page.
That sounds great. Let's try it. Let's pretend we're at school. Why don't you're walking into class? Is your assignment book in the front of the backpack? Okay.
It's right here.
Oh, awesome. How long do you think that took you?
And the clip is on the right page.
So you're ready to write it down?
I'm ready.
How long did that take?
5 minutes.
Oh, I think it took maybe a couple seconds. Oh, that was excellent. So I'm going to stop us here in the interest of time. Thank you, Marianne. In real life, I would go through multiple times of this practice and we would do it. Okay, now I'm your science teacher. Now I'm your social studies teacher. I will tell you with older kids, I have had college students do this. I say, yeah, I know you roll your eyes at me, but we still have to do it. Because until they actually do it, the plan is just in their head. It's not concrete reality. And that motor practice is actually a key piece of learning the new skill. What we're wanting to do is do the learning that happens when they're learning to do something like riding a bike or tying a shoe. That repeated motor practice is what makes this happen more naturally. The other piece I would add to the end, if I was doing it in real life, is how can she remember to do it the next day at school? We came up with the plan here, but how is she going to remember it the next day? So the last piece of the how is you using all these parent strategies that you use to help them do anything you want them to do. First, we want to think about your attention. It's really hard because we're so busy. Naturally, we give more attention when they mess up because we want to fix it. So but the problem is we need to give more attention when they're successful than when they're wrong, or else they're not going to learn the new skill. So for example, if your child brought home everything that they need to do assignments for 6 of their classes, but they forgot the supplies they needed for one homework in one class, before we jump to panic and problem solving about the one they forgot, let's make sure we praise them that they did it right for the other 6 classes. Our goal was to tell them 4 positives for every negative we give them in order to help them feel good about themselves, but also in order to help them be more likely to repeat that positive. Because whatever we give attention to is what they're more likely to do. We also want to use the other techniques we would use, like rewards, to help encourage them to do it. I love my job, and there's parts of my job I do even without a paycheck, but there's some things that I wouldn't do if I didn't have to do them to earn my paycheck. For your child, organization is likely one of the things they find aversive and difficult to do. So even though to you, it might seem like, oh, that takes 30 seconds. It's so easy. For them, it feels very difficult and they need a paycheck. This doesn't need to be money. It might be time with a parent, access to video game time, or other privileges. It might be how they earn the right to go out with friends on the weekend, but they need some incentive to do these boring things consistently while they're creating the habit. And in fact, we find that differences between the brains of children with ADHD and those without ADHD when they're doing something boring are no longer present if we're offering them a reward for doing the boring task. So offering a reward opens up your child's brain. It gives them full access to their brain while they're trying to learn a new skill. And then lastly, if you need them to remember to do something at school, work with their teacher, set up a homeschool note or something to help you know what's happening at school. So what do I want my child to learn? I just talked about how. Now I want to say, think about what skills should your child learn. So if we have difficulty remembering things, in order to remember things, I need to make a written reminder and put that reminder at a place where I'll see it when I need it. Often children or teens don't do something because they forget to do it. An example of this is a teenager I worked with who came home to an empty house and needed to do homework before his parents got home from work. His parents were really frustrated because every day they would come home and he'd just be watching a Netflix movie and wouldn't have even started his homework. But this teen told me he really wanted to do his homework. He just forgot. The minute he walked in the door, he turned on the TV, he was absorbed in the movie, and he completely forgot about homework. So what we did is we put a sticky note right smack in the middle of the TV screen. Homework? Question mark. That was the only intervention we did. And once we did that, his parents came home and he had done his homework because that stopped that thing and reminded him of doing it. So sometimes a key thing is just that simple reminder, but putting it where you're going to look at it. I've had kids have reminders hanging in a doorway so that they hit it with their head as they walk through, swinging from a rope or something, because they say, I won't see it otherwise. What about materials? The key thing with materials is if I want to keep track of my things, I need to have a special place for everything. Kids with ADHD really like to stash and dash. So we can have these really complicated organizational systems, but if it's not quick to get in and out, it's going to be really hard to use and they're not going to use it and do the other thing, which is put it away right away. And then of course, there needs to be regular weeding out or else it's going to start to expand. What about time? If I want to hold on to my free time, the key thing is I need to plan my time, pay attention to the clock, and also think about my structure. Often kids with ADHD are resistant to looking at clocks. They'll tell me, you don't get it, Dr. Nissley, I'm not a time person. But actually, because in their mind, clocks are the thing that gets them in trouble. It's what goes too fast when they're having fun and too slow when they're bored. But what we want to do is help them recognize that by paying attention to the clock, they actually get free time. And lastly, if we're wanting to plan for long-term assignments or projects, a key thing is to start by deciding what is my goal. Break it down into steps, make it explicit, create a written plan, and then add them to the daily calendar. Because this process is hard for them, you need to do this with them at first. Gradually over time, you should be able to get less and less involved. One way to become less involved is like I talked about before, use written prompts. So create a special outline for a plan for your child, and they may be more easily able to fill in the steps themselves. If you asked me to drive to Pittsburgh and I didn't know how to do that, and I didn't have a map or GPS, I wouldn't get in the car and just start driving. Yet that's a bit like what we ask children with weak executive functions to do when we assign a project. We have to help them build a map. Here's an example of a possible map for a project. It might be, what is the topic? Where do I get the information I need? What's the format? Maybe I even draw it to make it concrete. What are the steps? What materials do I need? How will I decide when it's complete? In addition to being a guide to the steps, this kind of map can help them over time not be so overwhelmed because they see that as a pattern. They're going to essentially go through the same steps for every project, even when they're from different classes. The other great thing is these plans can be kept in a notebook to refer to in the future, but also some blank ones can be kept there. So when the project's assigned, they can turn to it and write down those details there that don't fit in that little planner space and therefore don't get written down. The last thing I want to mention is I said we do not have any evidence comparing specific strategies. So in the absence of research evidence saying what one works better, what you should do is pick a strategy. Pick one that your child thinks might work best, one that fits with the school systems. And then think about what are the outcomes you care about. Measure those outcomes. Is it turning in their homework? Is it their grades? Is it catching the bus in the morning? And then if the strategy doesn't work, let your child know they succeeded because they tried, and either you just need a better strategy or you need more practice with the strategy. So I'm going to turn things over now to Dr. Glanzman to talk about brain-focused treatments.
Brain-focused treatments target improving brain function overall, thereby presumably improving the core EFs rather than targeting the daily life EF skills like Dr. Nissley-Tsiopinis was just talking about. What interventions do we have that are brain-focused? Brain-focused treatments for ADHD include medication, exercise, neurofeedback, brain training, mindfulness meditation, diet modification, and transcranial magnetic stimulation. We're not going to talk about that last one because it's really pretty much a research tool right now, and there's not much study of it. These interventions are listed roughly in the order of the evidence that we have for them that they may work, but most of the evidence we have is for improvement in general ADHD symptoms. We are beginning to accumulate evidence that these interventions may also improve EFs. Medication treatment has the most evidence for improving everyday EF skills. The benefits include improving EF skills that are actually correlated with everyday life skills and with overall ADHD symptoms. One of the limitations, though, is that medication only improves EFs when the medication is actually working. And there's little evidence for long-term improvement in EF after medication is discontinued. Furthermore, children continue to show organizational, time management, and planning skill impairments even when they're on medication, which is why the additional interventions are important. Benefits to EF are somewhat mixed, especially for methylphenidate, which has been studied the most. It may improve some aspects of EF, such as sustained attention or resistance to interference. It may have no effect on others, such as delay aversion, and it may actually worsen others, such as the ability to be flexible and to flexibly update working memory. If you use this treatment, it's important to ensure that the benefits to ADHD and EF outweigh the side effects and also outweigh that tendency that medicine may have to cause more getting stuck, difficulty being flexible. You might want to plan on working on getting unstuck in other ways. It's also important to get executive tasks done while the medicine's in effect. There is no harder time to be an executive than when your medication is wearing off. And of course, you still need to employ the strategies you learned about teaching daily life EF skills. Medicine doesn't teach skills, but it can make a child more amenable to learning and practicing them. Exercise shows the most consistent positive effects on ADHD and executive functions among the mind-body interventions, even though the effects are somewhat small. Exercise changes the brain. It stimulates the production of neurotransmitters and new neurons and neuron connections. It increases the thickness of the cortex and partially normalizes the abnormal electrical activity in the brains of individuals with ADHD. We have known for some time that exercise has positive effects on a number of other things that may impact children with ADHD, such as stress, anxiety, mood, social function, and self-esteem. These factors may secondarily affect executive functions. Both intermittent and regular exercise have positive effects on ADHD symptoms and EFs. By intermittent exercise, we mean a single session of exercise before a challenging task. And by regular exercise, we mean 1 or more times a week for several weeks to months. Improvements from exercise include the ADHD-related behavior symptoms, but also processing speed, sustained attention, inhibitory control, cognitive flexibility, and working memory, based, that is, on neuropsychological tests. There's limited study of the daily life EF skills, but we do know that a longer duration of regular exercise shows a greater effect, might even last post-treatment when the study is over, and may improve academic performance. If you use this treatment, it's important that intermittent exercise should be about 15 to 20 minutes of moderate intensity. Moderate intensity is 65 or so to 75% or so of your maximal heart rate, which is 220 minus age. With regular exercise, both the cardiovascular kind of exercise, such as running or being on a treadmill, and a skill improving kind of exercise, such as a sport, about 3 times a week for 5 to 12 weeks shows the best effect. Finally, exercise should be adaptive. That means it should start out mildly challenging, and the level of challenge should increase as your child's ability improves. Neurofeedback. So neurofeedback is a type of biofeedback that uses behavior management. Rewards are used to help a child learn to control brain electrical activity. That sounds wild, doesn't it? Electrodes on the scalp provide information about brainwave electrical activity that's translated into the form of a video game. And if a child can modulate brainwave activity in the desired direction or to the desired degree, points are earned in the game that the child can then trade for prizes. About 50% of children are successful at learning to do this. So why should this help ADHD? Many studies have shown abnormalities in brainwave patterns in children and adults with ADHD. They may have too much of the type of brainwaves that your brain makes when it's sleepy, or the type it makes when it's overactive, or they may have too little of the type of brainwaves that indicate that the brain is quiet but alert and attentive, or their brainwaves may be slow to respond or respond less robustly than normal to incoming stimuli. The benefits of neurofeedback have been sustained over many years of studies. Although studies are mixed, neurofeedback is becoming recognized as an evidence-based treatment for ADHD. When it's helpful, there tends to be more effect on attention than hyperactivity. And effects can last even after the treatment period, which can be up to like weekly for up to a year. If you use this treatment, one of the things that's really important is to find a practitioner who will use the protocol that matches your child's EEG abnormalities. Some will just do the same protocol for all children, and that's not as likely to be helpful. You'll want to know how the practitioner will determine if my child is a successful learner who can be able to do this, What will the endpoint of treatment be? How will we know that we've gotten to the endpoint? And how long should that take to achieve? As I said, this is often somewhere between 30 and 60 sessions once a week. Finally, what will this cost? Because insurance doesn't cover this, although as more studies show positive effects, perhaps that will change. Direct skills training, sometimes called brain training or cognitive training. These programs claim to train the underlying cognitive skills, for example, the core EFs, such as working memory, inhibition, set shifting, which is a rapid response to new rules, a form of cognitive flexibility, processing speed, or auditory or visual processing accuracy. As such, this is really a cross between child skills training that Dr. Nissley-Tsiopinis talked about and direct brain-focused interventions, because they're training specific cognitive rather than daily life skills. Practicing these brain-focused skills has also been shown to change the brain in areas related to attention and working memory. Most of these programs, though not all of them, are computerized games. The benefits have, as I said before, mostly measured in terms of attention and core ADHD symptoms, but there are also improvements in tests of visual and verbal memory. Often, children show improved performance on similar computer-based tests to what they were practicing. These are called near transfer effects, meaning that the improvements are seen when the test used to measure improvement is similar to the game that the child practiced during treatment. Most studies of brain training, in addition to showing mixed effects on inhibition, have shown limited effects on, for example, school functioning or effects on executive memory and academic outcomes. These are called far transfer effects and are obviously what we want. Have you heard of the new video game being advertised as an FDA-approved treatment for ADHD? This is an example of a cognitive or brain training program. FDA approval for devices means that it's been proven not harmful. Well, what we might want as proof of effectiveness is not really required for a device. Approval for this video game was based on one study that showed positive near transfer effects. If you use brain training treatment, you'll want to know what the endpoint of treatment will be, how it will be measured, and how long it should take to achieve. Again, what is the cost? You go to a provider to be trained in how to do this. Again, you have to make sure that the tasks will get more difficult as your child's skills improve. This is an important component of the studies that showed improvement. And you'll want to ask for tips for generalizing the training gains to daily life skills. Mindfulness meditation. Mindfulness is the practice of bringing attention to the experience of the present moment with an open, non-judgmental attitude. Because it's all about practicing awareness in the moment, it does have the potential to help children improve their attention to the moment and their thinking before acting. Mindfulness meditation also has been shown to change the brain in ways that are consistent with improved cognitive control. The most robust improvements in mindfulness training are in mindfulness itself, stress reduction, improvement in internalizing symptoms, that's anxiety or depression, and social emotional characteristics. Most studies in adults and adolescents do find improvement in ADHD symptoms and small positive effects on executive function by both tests and rating scales, with some persistence of effects found at 3 to 6 months of follow-up. This intervention has primarily been studied in adolescents because children have difficulty recognizing and reporting when they're meditating effectively. Limitations. Well, mindfulness has a lot of positive effects and it's a promising intervention, but specific effects on daily life EF skills have not been studied sufficiently, so we don't really know if the improvement keeps going once you stop meditating, or if you have to just keep doing it in order to continue to have improvements. If you use this treatment, you might want to consider a mixed meditation yoga program or other program that supports meditation with movement. This has been shown to help movement. The movement component has been shown to help children meditate more effectively. You'll want to work with someone who is used to working with children. You might want to monitor other benefits such as anxiety, stress, and mood. The duration of these programs is typically 4 to 8 weeks. The frequency usually several times per week. But as I said before, we don't really know much about persistence. Nutrients and diet. So a healthy diet during pregnancy, early childhood, and adolescence has been shown to be associated with lower rates of ADHD in children born from these pregnancies and in children and adolescents who themselves eat a healthy diet. By healthy diet, we mean one that's high in fruits, vegetables, whole grain, and fish, in contrast to a Western diet, which is high in sweets and processed foods. Associations don't prove cause, but we do know that about 15% of children may be adversely affected by artificial colors, flavors, preservatives. Some children do better in terms of behavior with a higher protein to carbohydrate ratio in their diet. A subset of children improve with supplementation of multivitamins, omega-3 fatty acids, and magnesium, but only if they're deficient. And for some children who don't have true food allergies, commonly allergenic foods can affect mood, behavior, and attention, presumably by causing inflammation that affects the brain. Emerging studies show that changes in brainwave patterns on EEG and activation of brain areas on functional neuroimaging with the elimination of additives or inflammatory foods indicates that diet intervention can change the brain. This suggests that direct studies of the effects of elimination diets on executive functions are worth pursuing. But right now, there's a lack of well-controlled studies, even in ADHD itself, and especially in EF. So with the options of parent training, child skills training, and brain-focused interventions, how should we think about putting together an EF intervention plan in relation to development? We want to establish a daily homework check-in routine early. Make the daily check-in with you something that's part of the homework routine. As your child gets used to checking the assignment book or online homework program and checking off tasks, your check-in can move from the beginning to the end of homework to model and teach checking that everything is done. Choose one skill needed for academic success to focus on each year. For example, in 3rd grade, the backpack and organization of materials. In 4th grade, the assignment book. In 5th grade, you can add in long-term assignment planning to your assignment book. And in 6th grade, including studying for tests and fitting in your extracurriculars in the assignment book. Each year, you want to reinforce prior skills while adding new skills. And then you want to use the summer to develop home-based or daily life skills. For example, meal prep, laundry, cleaning your room, chores. And don't forget about planning your summer reading and assignments. In terms of the brain-focused treatments, NF and computer-based brain training are not typically done before mid-childhood, though there are games, exercises, and even educational curricula used in preschool to help children practice their growing executive skills. As I mentioned, individual mindfulness meditation may be difficult for pre-adolescents, but there are apps and meditation stories that exist for younger children to support a meditative frame of mind. At all ages, we want to set up a child's brain for learning with a healthy diet, low in processed foods, high in different colors of fruits and vegetables with a good amount of protein for breakfast, regular, moderate, vigorous exercise, ideally 10 hours of sleep, and minimizing stress. We know enough about the benefits of these 4 items for brain health that even though they may not be well studied in terms of EF development, we include them in recognition of the limited window of opportunity we have to maximize brain development that underlies executive functioning. We know that brain development happens largely before birth and in the first 2 years of life. However, there are bursts in the formation of increased brain connections at roughly 3 to 5 years of age, 7 to 9, 11 to 13, and 17 to 19 that correlate with bursts in EF progress. It would not be unreasonable to hypothesize that optimizing brain health combined with skills training may allow for the best likelihood of strong EF development during these timeframes. And with that idea in mind, we'd like to say thank you and take your questions.
Thank you. That was excellent. Do you want families to shout their questions out or type them in the chat?
Raise a hand.
Or raise a virtual hand. I forgot that option. Yes. Raise your virtual hand if you have a question.
Okay.
There's a couple of questions in the chat.
Being read to us.
Okay, so what type of person should I ask for in an IEP? Who is the person at the school district level to administer strategies?
Take that one.
Sure. I apologize. So it really depends who in the school is the one that does this. Most schools have somebody who works in an executive function capacity. The extent to which they're trained to do skills varies greatly by district. But the goal is there are people who specifically in that school, sometimes they're part of the educational team, sometimes they're part of the clinical team. And that can be a challenge with this because it's one of those things that comes in between the two. I've seen guidance counselors most frequently be the ones in the school who do this. They don't and other times it's instructional support teachers, learning support teachers. So schools themselves decide, and there's strengths brought by each of those to it. So it's ultimately who in the school has for that.
The next question we have is, how do you help a parent who is him or herself ADHD, has ADHD, learn to teach these skills to an ADHD child?
That sounds like one for you too.
Okay. So that's a super question, because what we're asking, so first of all, what we're asking is we're asking you to do what's already hard for you. Set up regular structures and routines and talk about it. Sometimes a parent with ADHD can be really good at this in terms of creating a safe space. If you're willing to join and say, okay, I forget things too. So let's figure out how we can figure out a system that works for both of us. And that can be a good way to figure out how to join, but then following through and figuring out a way to be following through. We need to make sure there's structures for that. Parents with ADHD, I've had success with them being able to do it, but it's hard. We're asking them a lot. And so a lot of times having a therapist to come alongside so that you can join with your child, but somebody else can help in setting up the structure can be helpful. Getting the school involved in setting up the structure can be helpful. But I will say also, the nice thing with child skills training is even if you're having trouble setting up the parent part of the systems, the rewards and this and that, the rewards are really helpful for learning. But I've seen kids do really good because they just want their grades to get better. And that can be a reward enough in itself. So just because it's hard to set up a reward program, I wouldn't discourage you from trying the skills training. You can keep practicing. It might go slower without it if you're not good at setting up a reward program, but you still can do it.
If you have a spouse or older child or grandparent nearby who can help, this is a great opportunity to ask for help from your other adults. This is a big job, and you have permission to get somebody else to cook dinner that night or someone else to do the grocery shopping or the laundry. I hope you have that person.
Okay, our next question is, how do you know when you need to increase your child's medicine?
That one's yours.
When medicine is no longer working, and I should start by saying that sometimes there's a honeymoon period with medicine and it works initially, but it seems to stop working as well after a period of time. That might be because your child has grown, but it might be because there is some degree of tolerance. There are a couple of common things that are seen. First of all, if your child is older, they may tell you, I'm not concentrating as well, or the teacher may have some feedback. Make sure the teacher knows that you want feedback about this so that they will tell you that promptly. Another thing that may happen is the medicine may be working well in the morning, but the duration of the effect may shorten. And so it may have lasted all day before, but now it's wearing off before the end of the day. The third thing that happens for some children is that it seems inconsistent day to day. One day it seems like it's working, the next day it seems like it's not. And then the fourth thing that might be seen is that rebound period that happens when the medicine is wearing off might start to look worse and longer. It's interesting to think about the idea that rebound can be better at a higher dose of medicine sometimes. So those are four things that I tell families to look for that might indicate that the medicine is no longer working as well as it used to.
Okay, our next question is, if my child has severe deficits in nearly every aspect of EF, which then affects nearly every skill and step of the day, where do I even begin?
Super question. And the temptation is to try to change everything because it feels like things are falling apart. I would say start with the thing that feels like it's doable. It doesn't feel impossible when you talk about it with your child, but has the chance to actually make a difference so that your child can feel a sense of success. Because if they have initial success with one thing, then you can move into the next thing.
If your child is old enough, for example, to be in later elementary school or middle school especially, having an assignment book that works effectively is sort of a key central issue, I think, because nothing else really works if the assignment book doesn't work effectively. The other thing is the situation when there are many kinds of problems is the situation where working closely with the teacher is particularly critical, because you need information to come home that allows you to help your child, and the teacher needs information to go back that allows him or her to support your work at home.
And the last thing I just wanted to say related to that, we said to avoid accommodation because you want to teach skill. But in a situation like that, you might need to set up accommodations for certain pieces and make one piece of it the skill you're trying to teach. But so there's still that safety net for the other skills while they're trying to learn the one piece of it.
Okay, our next question is, do you have a strategy to help a teen who may just ignore their chunked up reminders, such as visible Post-its or alarms on their phone?
You want me to? Okay.
Go ahead.
So I will say most teens that I work with might, because they don't want to admit that something's hard, or they don't want to admit that they're messing up. It will look like they're ignoring. It'll look like they don't care. It's probably one of two things. Either they find those things annoying, so they turn the sound off, or they forget to turn it back on after school, or maybe it rings at just the wrong time when they're in the middle of something, so that they forget. Or it's that piece I had talked about earlier, the steps too big, is the reminder to do something. For example, somebody who needs to write a paragraph for a paper, maybe writing a paragraph's hard to start, and what they need to do is write a sentence, say one topic. So what I would say is break it down smaller, get them engaged in sort of saying, how do you remember? How do you know what to do? And have them help come up with the ways to remember.
Our next question is, if there is no one to provide support within their school, what qualifications should I be looking for when trying to find someone independently?
I'll start. So there isn't an executive coach degree. So this might be an educator, a psychologist. There are some people out there who are adults with ADHD who just want to help kids be more successful perhaps than they were as children. A lot of people can have good ideas. We are not against the strategies that people have come up with, even if they haven't been researched, because as I hope you took away from this, research is growing, but it's still limited. So I think you can look for personal recommendations. You can look at people who advertise online for reviews. You can look at their educational backgrounds, but they will come with all different educational backgrounds, and that's okay. You may want to look at what their experience was before they hung out their shingle in terms of executive coaching. And again, many of them are educators or psychologists.
Yeah, and the only things I would add to that is ultimately it's about thinking about how you want your child to grow and change and setting some criteria for that and talking to them about it. So people might be fun to talk with and they may have great theories, but you want to make sure it actually impacts them in turning in homework or in doing what they want to do. And so I would test it out. Somebody might sound like they have really good ideas, but let's see how they connect with your child and see if your child starts improving. And if they don't, does that person meet with you and try to figure out a way to get past it? The research-based interventions that have been shown to work, many of them are behaviorally based. There's also literature in language-based and other areas. But so having some awareness of behavioral techniques, because there is a strong basis of behavioral techniques, regardless of your background, having some awareness of that is likely also to be very helpful.
Are there any other questions?
Can we all drop our kids off at your office tomorrow?
I think I'm going to call in sick.
I think we're sleeping in tomorrow.
Yes. We joke about it, but I do know it's a really difficult time to find interventions, and I don't take that lightly. And I know, we have too long of a waiting list, something we're trying to fix at the Center for the Management of ADHD. There's a lot of kids out there, and COVID has made it even worse, being out of the system of practicing organization, practicing executive function has set a lot of kids back. So I will just say, be persistent, be an advocate. There are resources out there and books and things like that. And we are trying our best to multiply ourselves and others. And I know others are doing the same to try to have the wherewithal to help. So thank you. And I'm going to turn things back to Erica to close.
Thank you very much and good night.
Yes, good night.
Thank you, both of you. And thank you to everybody that helped to make that possible. I'm going to let everybody go. There's lots of thank yous in the chat. We will get a recording of this. It is going to come from chat though, so it'll take a little longer than when I am in charge of the recording, I'm sure, but I will post that in there. Hopefully this is super helpful. I know they're going to do a longer version of this presentation publicly, so I can keep you posted on that. And I'll let you get back to what's left of your evening. See everybody in the group, and thanks for coming.